Ferrari have just launched their car and it's already creating a massive response from F1 fans all over the world. But some fans have been somewhat negative as it seems that Ferrari have introduced a car with illegal parts. And this hasn't gone down well. We'll dive right into Ferrari's car launch, its main new characteristics, and the part that could be illegal when the season starts. It was an F1 launch season that began with fictional 2023 cars, livery-only debuts, renderings and teasers that's now come to an end this week, and due to the efforts of Aston Martin and Ferrari in particular. McLaren is no exception, with the fact that its new car is little change from last year's, indicating a lack of development rather than an attempt to conceal the true MCL60. But it was Ferrari that truly lifted the standard, holding its first full-fledged live premiere event, rather than a basic internet feed, since 2020 and doing so with elegance. But although the launch was a great way to show the new car, there are some minor problems ahead for the Scuderia, as they've seemed to launch a car with illegal parts. In this video, we'll find out why and if they can drive with these parts during the season. So, when you look at the facilities Ferrari has in Fiorano, particularly the test track, it's difficult to imagine how it could ever be beaten. But Formula 1 isn't won on merit or history, thus they'll have to work hard like any other team to win prizes. But it seems like they have cracked the code, as the new SF-23 from Ferrari uses the same general aerodynamic structure as the 2022 Formula 1 vehicle. The radiator intake and the undercut on the front corner of the side pod have been further optimized but remain fairly comparable. Ferrari has also preserved the bathtub top surface on the side pod. This surface has less louvers, but they'll be customizable based on the particular cooling needs of each circuit, making the car easier to set up on all the different tracks. When looking at the images from last year and this year, we can see that the top surface of the bathtub side pod is not as spectacular as it was last year. The exit louvers located immediately behind the top portion of the radiator will boost radiator cooling effectiveness in this location. The inlet sweeps further around the side pod's corner, the aperture is longer and shallower, and the open area is fairly comparable. The undersurface to the intake, on the other hand, is presumably higher, leaving greater area for the undercut. The side pod front corner undercut is a little more appealing than last year's. It has a less vertical outer body surface, making it more sensitive to changes in airflow direction. It's critical to design a surface that can withstand varying airflow, while the front wheels are guided. The front wheel angle in fast corners versus slow corners generates a significant change in airflow in this location. It's fascinating to see a lot of unpainted carbon on the surfaces, merely to save weight, which only goes to show that even for elite teams, the weight restriction is still very tough to meet. The front wing has changed from the previous year. The front element and the second element have the now common full-width float gap. Also, the trailing edge of the front wing's rear flap is rather constant heading outboard before dropping away swiftly from the inside of the front tyre. With this quick drop-off, the flow coming off the top surface of the front wing connects up to the tyre squirt, which is when the airflow is squeezed out as the front tyre rotates onto the track surface, and will generate as much outwash as possible. Ferrari has been focused on maximizing outwash in conjunction with these vanes. This is something that these laws have attempted to minimize, therefore it is expected that the FIA will properly examine these vanes. The legality of the vanes that Ferrari had introduced on the front wing of the SF-23 is in how they attach the third and fourth wing flaps. Will this be considered legal? That's the real question. Mercedes arrived at the US Grand Prix last year with a similar solution, but was forced to remove the brackets at the request of the FIA. The geometry of the vanes had to be within the restrictions, or Mercedes would not have tried it. Thus, the official's decision would have been based on the intent and purpose of the vanes. This year's regulations for the usage of anything like this were amended to limit the amount, overall size and curvature of these components. We can only imagine that Ferrari's modifications adhere to the wording of these new standards. When looking closely, it becomes noticeable that the three outside ones are slightly different from the inner two, implying that Ferrari is attempting to circumvent this restriction by claiming that they are utilized for separate reasons. As well as complying with the requirements, there's always the matter of what's termed primary purpose. So if something on the car is legal, and purportedly for one reason, in this case preserving the slot space, but the FIA feels it's for another, for example aerodynamic benefit, you may get into problems. Getting as much tyre squirt outboard as possible is essential to the amount of turbulence generated by the front tyre. It will have a detrimental influence on the airflow at the leading edge of the side pods and underfloor if it comes inboard. The front suspension consists of a push-rod-driven inner damper with a spring or torsion bar to support the car. The wishbone pickups, where they connect to the chassis, contain a modest degree of anti-squat, anti-lift to assist support the front of the car and decrease ride height shift when the loads vary while braking. The steering track rod is close to but somewhat higher than the front leg of the lower front wishbone. It's fascinating to observe how much curvature there is on the upper surface of the top wishbone's front leg. This is controlled by a 3.5:1 ratio, and typically this component would have the basic symmetrical aerodynamic shape. However, it appears like Ferrari has created a one-sided aerodynamic profile, similar to an upside-down wing. This is optimized to regulate the airflow flowing from the front wing's trailing edge and realign it as much as possible to increase the performance of the side pod's leading edge. The rear suspension is push-rod driven, as was the case last year. However, the forward leg of the top wishbone inboard mounting appears to be positioned a bit lower, providing greater anti-lift and reducing the rear ride height change when braking. The real body shape in the Coke bottle region is a little more bulbous, taking up some of the Coke bottle aperture as the body narrows towards the back wheels. This is one area where Ferrari differs significantly from the other cars we've seen, and we'll have to see if this works best for the new Ferrari Challenger. So, when Ferrari debuted the SF-23 for the first time in Maranello, keen observers observed that it uses slot gap generators identical to those banned for Mercedes last season, like we just talked about. Mercedes tested the concept during practice at the Mexican Grand Prix, but did not commit to qualifying or the race in order to prevent any complaints. It was eventually banned for violating the spirit of the regulations, since it may be utilized for aerodynamic purposes, negating the impact of the 2022 cars, which are supposed to produce tighter racing. So why would Ferrari try to commit to something that is illegal? Do they know more than us? Well, probably yes, but we've tried to figure it out for you. Originally, the FIA stated in the technical regulations that slot gap generators may only be utilized for mechanical, structural, or measuring purposes. Mike Elliott, Mercedes technical director, first objected to the usage of the word primarily when referring to the design was inconsistent with the rest of the standards. If you look at the regulations, there are about 40 incidences in the regulations of sole purpose. And in this case, it doesn't say sole purpose, it says primary purpose, referring to the design, he said at the time. Later, in the technical rules issued in early December, the phrase primarily was removed to indicate that they must simply establish a structural relationship between consecutive front-wing profiles. This implies that teams may now test front-wing designs with the slot gap generators that alter aerodynamics, as long as they meet the tight measurement standards, which is what Ferrari thinks it has done. This, combined with a clear difference between the slot gap generators, lets Ferrari believe they've figured it out in a way that the FIA can't contest. What do you think? Have Ferrari revealed a title-worthy challenger? And do you think that they have the capacity with their new team principal to win it all this season? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.